The cervical spine has several primary functions, the first of which is being to protect the spinal cord. And while that may sound fairly obvious, it literally has a mechanical block to protect or guard the spinal cord. You may have heard the term the articular pillar in the cervical spine, and that's all the vertebrae is stacked one on top of the other that house the spinal cord and allow for a safe place for those nerves to be housed to send important information up and down. It also allows for a mobile head. So the neck or the cervical spine is the most mobile region of the spine, and particularly the upper cervical spine is even more mobile than that. The upper cervical spine, or at C1, C2, allows for 45 degrees of your neck rotation each direction. So we're getting about 90 degrees of total arc of rotation just from the C1, C2 joint. So we have a lot of mobility in our neck. It's also closely integrated with the sensory systems and the vestibular system. I often tell a story of I was taking a parkour class several years back, and there was an individual in the class who had done 6 or 7 Ironman competitions. So by all accounts, he's a pretty fit person. During the class, he had to roll over from just going head over heels, basically, and then back up into a standing position. And after doing 2 or 3 of those, he was so dizzy because his vestibular system or his sensory system had not been challenged in those positions. So this is someone who can go out and do 140 miles of biking, swimming, and running, but just the act of going head over heels and challenging your neck muscles, the sensory, the vestibular system, it really showed how important the interaction of using those muscles in dynamic ways is because of the interaction between the neck and the head. It's also the origin of the entire peripheral nervous system and other important circulatory structures. The vestibular nerve, the carotid artery system, the jugular veins, all of those pass through the cervical spine. Additionally, it is the beginning point of our peripheral nervous system. So if someone has a spinal cord injury at C4, it's going to present way differently than someone down below. And this is a much more important region almost if you think about that, because if this is injured here, it's really going to impact everything down below. Whereas obviously if someone has a T12 spinal cord injury, they still have function above. So it's the housing of the origination of the peripheral nervous system. A great take-home point here is that the cervical spine provides both mobility and stability for the head while acting as a attachment point for our more relatively hypomobile thoracic spine. So we need this motion in our neck because the other regions aren't quite as mobile. Incidence, prevalence, and societal impact of neck pain. The prevalence is that it's going to affect between 16.7 and 75% of all people at some time during our lives. And that is based on world population studies. So you can see that the prevalence is all across the board. And in certain areas, there's going to be a much lower prevalence versus in other areas of the world, there's extremely high prevalences of neck pain. It's just the data and the research is so mixed on this. But we know from the orthopedic clinic that there is a ton of people coming to see us for neck pain. For incidence, the reason incidence is different than prevalence is because incidence is bound by a certain time frame. So it's a rate at a specific time. And for neck pain, it's going to be about 10.5 to 21% of people across the whole world will report neck pain at some time. Pain greater than 6 months in duration is going to affect 14% of people who have any episode of neck pain. So I look at this as the chance of neck pain becoming more chronic. And so about 14%, which may seem relatively low, but then if we look down at those facts later on, we can see that this is still having a huge societal burden. It's the second greatest cost for workers' compensation. $20 billion alone are spent due to lost time at work just for headaches. That's not even including whiplash or any of the other causes of mechanical neck pain. The middle bullet point there says neck pain percentages increases with age, and that's true. That in the The greatest number of people are going to have neck pain in their 5th decade of life, and it's also more common in women than men for whatever reason. I know that this information is all across the board, but that is simply because the reasons behind neck pain are so varied. So we used to say that it was just prolonged postures or mechanical factors that were causing neck pain. But these numbers on the incidence and prevalence is so varied because of the biopsychosocial factors that play a role in the experience of pain in general. As physical therapists, the current barriers to successful outcomes are going to be this shifting paradigm where we used to talk about anatomy, so we'd only address the deep neck flexors for someone who's having neck pain, or we'd only look at the shoulder blade stabilizers or the range of motion, to now assessing more of the pain science component, so looking at those biopsychosocial factors. I think PT is doing a great job, and I believe that we're really cutting edge with some of the research that's coming out. And one of those resources is the Clinical Practice Guidelines for Neck Pain, which you can find online, and they come out of the JOSPT. What they found for risk factors, things to consider, and this had moderate evidence, so grade B evidence, is that if your age is greater than 40, so like I said, the 5th decade of life was the highest amount of people for neck pain. If you have a long history of neck pain, okay, so if you have neck pain, you're more likely to have neck pain. Coexisting lower back pain, so we know there's something to do with spinal pain just in general. Cycling as a regular activity, that is more likely than not a positional thing. So cyclists often are forward, rounded, and having to look up, which strains the muscles of the upper cervical spine. And then also some other biopsychosocial factors, so worrisome attitude, a poor quality of life, less vitality, all of those things which are harder to quantify play an important role in treating neck pain. And because they're so difficult to comprehend or to work with someone on those factors, that's a major barrier to our current levels of success. So why review the anatomy? Over the next several slides here, you're going to see that we talk quite a bit about the vertebrae, the vertebral artery, the muscles, the nerves. Why spend all this time on it if we're in the middle of this shifting paradigm? One, for safety reasons, we want to make sure that we're doing proper ligamentous checks and screenings, the vertebral basilar insufficiency checks. And while those individually don't have the best research, knowing how to test those structures is going to put you in a much better position to rule in or decide in general when to refer someone out. Also, as physical therapists, we are often doing manual therapy treatment. So palpation of these structures, knowing what you're touching, where, is it safe to press on? Is this safe to manipulate? Knowing the anatomy is going to be the foundation for those things. As a manual therapist myself, I strongly believe that my ability to find different things and work on those things while giving them pain science education really helps determine my outcomes. So while it is this combined approach of biomechanics and anatomy and structural problems, that plus the pain science piece allows them to get the quickest outcome. And that's really what we talk about in the upcoming lectures that you'll see.